The city skyline glowed faintly as dawn broke, streaks of gold and pale pink brushing the windows of Victoria Sterling's luxurious penthouse. She stood motionless in the middle of her living room, an unopened wedding invitation resting heavily in her hand as though it carried the weight of her entire past. The embossed lettering glittered under the morning light. Jonathan Marcus requests the honor of your presence at his wedding. Her stomach tightened at the sight of his name. Jonathan wasn't just an ex. He had once been her everything, her fiancé, her partner in business, and the man she'd foolishly believed would stay by her side forever. Now he was marrying someone else. Not just anyone, but his assistant. And the media had already labeled it the wedding of the year, splashing headlines across society pages, whispering about Victoria's absence before she had even decided whether to attend. At 36, Victoria was a woman people envied, owner of a thriving communications empire, a figure known for her elegance, intelligence, and relentless drive. But standing barefoot in her silk pajamas, her hair still tangled from sleep, she didn't feel like the formidable CEO that the world respected. Instead, she felt like the naive young woman of her 20s, who had once put her faith in Jonathan only to have her heart shattered in return. Her assistant's words echoed from the day before, practical and merciless. You have to go, Victoria. If you don't, people will think you're bitter. The press will spin it. You know how they are. She hated that it was true. Appearances were everything in her world, and not showing up would be seen as weakness. But attending alone? That would be a different kind of humiliation. She needed to arrive not only unshaken but radiant, with someone remarkable by her side. That's when her mind drifted back to a chance encounter weeks earlier, one that had left an imprint she hadn't been able to shake. Her car had broken down after a late-night charity meeting in a neighborhood far removed from her own glossy world. While waiting for her driver, she had wandered toward a small park where a man was teaching his daughter to ride a bike. The little girl, no more than 6, had tumbled to the ground more than once. Each time the man crouched beside her, brushing dirt from her scraped knees with a patience that seemed endless. His voice was steady and warm, filled with reassurance rather than scolding. It's okay, Isabella. Remember, every fall just means you're closer to getting it right. We never stop trying no matter what. Victoria had been struck by the tenderness of the moment. This was no polished executive putting on a show. This was a father giving his child the gift of resilience. Something about the sight unsettled her in a way she didn't fully understand. When her driver finally pulled up, she found herself lingering, asking questions about the community center nearby, about the programs for children in the area. The man, Michael Rodriguez, had answered with quiet humility. She learned he was 38, once an accomplished architect, who had walked away from his career after his wife abandoned him and their daughter. He juggled part-time jobs now, handyman work, construction shifts, tutoring, anything that would allow him to provide for Isabella without sacrificing his presence in her life. The conversation was brief, yet she walked away with his business card tucked into her bag, her thoughts oddly restless. She hadn't planned to call him, but now, staring at the wedding invitation that threatened to undo her composure, Michael's name was the only one that came to mind. It felt absurd, even reckless, but desperation made the decision for her. She dialed his number, her voice steadier than she felt when he answered. I have an unusual proposition, she said, framing it like a business deal. I need a date for a wedding this Saturday. It's purely professional, and I'll compensate you generously for your time. There was silence on the line before Michael spoke carefully. Miss Sterling, I'm not sure we move in the same circles. That's exactly why this works, she countered quickly. She could hear the edge of pleading in her voice and hated it. My ex is the groom. I need to walk into that wedding looking unbothered, strong. You're intelligent, respectable, and, she paused, remembering the man at the park in jeans and work boots. You'll make people believe me. Another silence, heavier this time. Then in a voice both wary and resigned, he asked, how much? The figure she named was enough to cover Isabella's daycare for months. That was when Michael agreed. Now the evening of the wedding loomed. Victoria had arranged everything, his tuxedo tailored, his appearance polished by her stylist, every detail crafted to perfection. Yet as she waited for him to arrive at her apartment, a nervous flutter stirred inside her chest. When the door finally opened and Michael stepped inside, transformed from the rugged handyman she remembered, into a man who looked as though he belonged on a magazine cover, she caught her breath. The tuxedo fit him flawlessly, but it was his quiet confidence that unsettled her most. He carried himself not with arrogance, but with the unshakable dignity of someone who had faced real battles and survived them. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she appeared in her navy blue gown, and the sincerity in his voice struck her more deeply than she cared to admit. The Thornfield estate rose before them like a monument to wealth and history, its ivy-covered walls and towering gates, speaking of generations of privilege. For Victoria, the place carried the sharp sting of memories, fundraisers she had once hosted with Jonathan, evenings when she thought she was walking toward a shared future. Now it was the stage where she would face the most public reminder of betrayal. As the car rolled up the circular driveway, Victoria's pulse quickened. She checked her reflection in the vanity mirror, adjusting the gloss on her lips with hands steadier than she felt. "Remember," she whispered, her voice sharp with both nerves and control, "we've been dating for a few months. You're in construction management. If anyone asks for details, keep it vague." Michael nodded without hesitation. There was no trace of panic in his face, no awkwardness. When he stepped out of the car and extended his arm for her to take, she noticed the quiet strength in his stance. He didn't shrink from the grandeur of the estate, or the curious stares of the guests streaming toward the entrance. Instead, he moved with the ease of someone who didn't measure his worth against chandeliers or champagne fountains. The rose garden ceremony was breathtaking. Rows of white roses arching overhead, chandeliers suspended on delicate wires that sparkled like frozen stars. 300 guests filled the space, their whispered conversations hushed by the music that floated gently through the air. Victoria led Michael towards seats near the back, but she could already feel the weight of eyes on them. "Who's that with Victoria Sterling?" she heard faintly behind her. "He's handsome, but I don't recognize him. Must be from outside the city." Victoria straightened her shoulders, refusing to let the murmurs shake her. She had come prepared for scrutiny, but when she glanced at Michael, she found him not scanning the crowd or stiff with self-consciousness. He was watching the proceedings with genuine interest, as though he were simply grateful to witness a moment of beauty. When the bride stumbled slightly on the hem of her gown, Michael instinctively leaned forward, a reflex of protectiveness, though he was too far away to help. Jonathan stood at the altar in his custom-tailored tuxedo, radiant with pride and arrogance. His smile as his bride reached him was the same smile he had once reserved for Victoria, and for a fleeting moment, it pierced her defenses. She forced herself to breathe, to focus on the man seated beside her, who seemed untouched by the pretenses swirling around them. After the ceremony, the reception spilled into the estate's grand ballroom, where crystal chandeliers glittered above polished floors and waiters carried trays of champagne. Victoria clutched her glass like armor, determined to maintain her carefully constructed composure. But her resolve wavered when Jonathan appeared at their table, his new wife on his arm, his expression dripping with smugness. "Victoria," he said, his tone laced with false warmth. "So glad you could make it." His eyes flicked to Michael. "And who's Jonathan?" "This is Michael Rodriguez," Victoria replied smoothly, her voice steady. "Michael, my former business partner, Jonathan Marcus." She let the word former linger, sharp as a blade. Jonathan's smile tightened as he extended a hand. "Rodriguez," he mused. "Are you in media as well?" "Construction," Michael answered, his grip firm but unforced. "I build things that last." The words hung in the air like a quiet thunderclap, carrying a weight Jonathan couldn't ignore. The subtext was clear: honesty and integrity versus Jonathan's empire built on deceit. Victoria caught the flicker of anger in her ex's eyes, and for the first time that evening, she felt herself exhale, grateful for Michael's unshakable presence. Jonathan's young wife shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his arm. He masked his irritation with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said coolly, "how refreshing to see Victoria exploring new demographics." Heat rushed to Victoria's face, humiliation burning hot and sharp. But before she could speak, Michael rose slowly to his full height, his presence commanding the room's attention. "In my line of work," he said evenly, his voice calm yet edged with steel, "the strongest foundations are built on respect and integrity." Funny how some people never learn that lesson. A hush fell over the table. Jonathan's face darkened, his jaw tightening, but Michael didn't give him the satisfaction of further confrontation. Instead, he turned to Victoria, his expression softening. "Would you like to dance?" Her throat tightened with a rush of gratitude, and something more. She placed her hand in his, trembling as he guided her to the dance floor. The music swelled, and as Michael pulled her into a slow waltz, she whispered, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry. He's always been cruel, but dragging you into it was unforgivable." Michael shook his head gently, his eyes steady on hers. "He doesn't define you, Victoria, and he certainly doesn't define your worth." The sincerity in his words struck deeper than she expected. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to look fully into his eyes. What she found there wasn't pity or performance. It was understanding, carved by his own struggles and softened by resilience. "How do you know how to dance like this?" she asked, attempting to mask her vulnerability with a light tone. Michael's lips curved into a genuine smile, his eyes brightening. "My daughter insisted I learn. She has very strong opinions about what makes a gentleman." Despite herself, Victoria laughed soft. "Isabella sounds remarkable." "She is," Michael replied simply. "She's everything. When her mother left, I thought my world had ended, but Isabella taught me something. Sometimes losing what you think you want makes space for what you actually need." The words settled in Victoria's chest like truth she had long avoided. Her eyes stung with tears, though she refused to let them fall. Here, under the glow of chandeliers and the scrutiny of hundreds, she found herself seeing Michael not just as a shield for the evening, but as a man whose strength carried a depth she had never known. The waltz slowed, but the tension inside Victoria didn't ease. Each step felt like a fragile balance between composure and collapse. She had come here to prove she was untouchable, yet somehow Michael's presence was breaking down walls she had spent years fortifying. As the song ended, applause rippled across the dance floor. Michael bowed slightly, his hands still at her back as though shielding her from the world. When they returned to their table, Victoria noticed the way her business associates were watching. She braced herself for judgment, but instead saw something else: curiosity. Michael had managed to step into her polished, cutthroat world and meet it on his own terms. Conversation soon drew him in, from city planning to the challenges of affordable housing. Victoria listened in quiet amazement as he spoke with clarity and thoughtfulness, never pretending to be someone he wasn't. Men who had built their reputations on bravado leaned forward to hear his perspective. Women smiled at his politeness, the way he stood each time one approached the table. But it wasn't his intelligence or composure that undid her. It was the smaller things. The way he noticed her glass of sparkling water and refilled it before she even asked. The way his hand lingered protectively at her back as they moved through the crowded room. The way his laughter wasn't forced but warm, easing tension with a kind of grace she hadn't known she craved. Later, as the ballroom buzzed with music and chatter, Victoria slipped outside to the terrace. Cool night air kissed her cheeks, carrying the faint fragrance of roses from the gardens below. For the first time all evening, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to exhale the pressure of the crowd. She heard footsteps behind her. Michael stepped onto the terrace, his tuxedo catching the moonlight. "Needed a break?" he asked softly. "Something like that." She leaned against the stone balustrade, her eyes on the glowing gardens. For a moment, silence stretched comfortably between them. Then, almost without meaning to, she began to speak. "Do you know what it's like to spend years building a life with someone?" she said quietly, "only to discover you were building it alone." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. 3 weeks before my wedding, I found out Jonathan was already with her. A photographer sold the story. That was how I learned my future had been a lie." Michael was quiet for a long while, his gaze on the twinkling fairy lights scattered across the garden. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his tone low but steady. "That kind of betrayal changes you." Victoria's chest tightened. "How do you trust again after something like that? How do you even try?" Michael exhaled slowly, as though weighing every word. "I had to learn that my ex-wife leaving wasn't about me. It was about her. Her inability to handle the responsibility of love. The hardest thing I've ever done was teaching myself that her failure didn't define my worth. If I let her choices dictate who I could become, I'd be giving her power she didn't deserve." His words struck her like truth long buried. Tears slid down her cheeks. Before she realized she was crying, she turned quickly, dabbing at her eyes. "I've been angry for so long," she whispered. "Work became my only refuge. Anger was easier. It made me feel strong." Michael's voice softened, yet carried a conviction that wrapped around her like armor. Anger protects us, but it also isolates us. Isabella taught me that. She was furious at her mother for the first year, wouldn't even look at her pictures. Then one day she asked me, "Daddy, if I'm angry at mommy, does that mean I can't love other people?" Victoria's breath caught. She turned toward him, searching his face. "And what did you say?" I told her that love isn't diminished by being hurt. It just becomes more careful about where it lands. The words broke something inside her. The ice that had encased her heart for 3 years began to thaw under their quiet wisdom. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "I've been terrified of letting anyone close again, afraid that if I trusted, I'd just be broken all over." Michael stepped closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Being hurt doesn't make you incapable of love, Victoria, it makes you wiser, more discerning, and sometimes the people worth trusting are the ones who've known the same pain and still choose kindness." The terrace fell silent again, filled only with the distant sound of music and laughter from inside. Victoria realized she was trembling, not from fear this time, but from the sense that something within her was shifting, cracking open to possibility. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Michael nodded. "Why did you agree to this? It can't have just been the money." He hesitated, his expression unreadable. For a moment she thought he might brush it off, but then he turned to her, his gaze steady. "3 weeks ago, I saw you at that community center meeting. Most executives leave as soon as their speeches end. You stayed, you asked questions, you listened. When that little boy spilled juice on your suit, you didn't scold him. You knelt down and helped him clean it up. You told him everyone makes mistakes." Victoria's breath caught. She remembered the boy Marcus, embarrassed and teary-eyed, the sticky juice spreading across her designer jacket. She had smiled, brushing it off like it was nothing. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. "I realized then," Michael continued, his voice low but unwavering, "that maybe you weren't as different from the rest of us as your reputation suggested. When you called me about tonight, I thought, maybe someone who understands what it feels like to be judged by appearances might also understand the value of second chances." Victoria's heart pounded, her throat tight with emotion. Second chance. The words felt foreign, yet achingly familiar, like something she had longed for without daring to admit it. Victoria's breath trembled in her chest as Michael's words lingered in the night air. Second chances. It wasn't something she had ever allowed herself to imagine. For years her armor had been built of cold determination and calculated poise. But here was a man, one who had every reason to be bitter, offering her something she thought no longer existed. Hope. She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the gardens below. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered, "as if choosing to open yourself again is just a decision." Michael leaned against the balustrade beside her, his profile etched in silver by the moonlight. "It isn't simple, it's terrifying, but I've learned something raising Isabella. Kids don't ask if the world is safe before they run. They just run. They fall, scrape their knees, and get up again. Somewhere along the way we forget that. We start thinking scars mean we can't move forward, but they're just reminders that we survived." Her throat tight. For so long she had viewed her scars as proof of failure, a testament to her inability to keep Jonathan loyal, to keep her heart protected. Now, under Michael's steady voice, she began to wonder if they were evidence of something else. Resilience. She turned toward him, her voice barely audible. "Michael, why are you doing this for me? Why tonight?" He met her gaze unflinching. "Because you remind me of myself, strong on the outside, carrying the weight of the world because it's easier than admitting you're lonely. I know what it's like to face a room full of people who think they know who you are when all they see is the surface. And I know what it feels like to need someone to stand next to you, even just for one night, to prove you're not as broken as they think." The words pierced through her defenses, drawing tears she could no longer fight. She turned away, but Michael gently touched her hand, grounding her. His warmth was steady, not demanding, as though he was saying, "I'm here, no matter what you show me." For a long moment they stood in silence, two souls bound not by romance, but by recognition. Then Victoria found herself speaking truths she had never voiced aloud. She told him of the endless pressure to be flawless, the loneliness of success,
the gnawing emptiness that no achievement had ever filled. She admitted that Jonathan's betrayal had left her questioning whether she was even worthy of love. Michael listened without interruption, his presence steady as the earth. When she finally faltered, he spoke in a voice quiet but resolute. "You are worthy, Victoria, not because of your company or your reputation, because you're human, because you care enough to still be standing after everything. That's worth more than perfection." Her breath caught, her chest aching with a release she hadn't known she needed. For 3 years she had silenced her pain behind walls of work and appearances. Tonight, in the company of a man she had hired to play a role, those walls crumbled. Michael hesitated then, his eyes searching hers. "I know this was supposed to be business," he said gently, "and I'll respect that if it's all you want. But I need you to know, this night hasn't felt like business to me." Victoria's heart pounded. She looked at him, really looked at him, not the tuxedo she had chosen, not the polished appearance she had crafted, but the man beneath, a father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter, a man who carried both strength and gentleness, a man who had seen her not as the ice queen of the tabloids, but as a woman who was simply tired of being alone. "What if," she began, her voice trembling, "what if I don't want this to be just business either?" Michael's eyes widened slightly, surprise softening into something luminous. "Victoria, what are you saying?" She drew a shaky breath. "I'm saying this evening has been the most honest I've felt in years. Watching you tonight, seeing the way you treat people, the way you carry yourself, it makes me want to be better, to try again, to believe again. And I think I'd like to meet Isabella, if you'd allow it." The words hung between them, fragile and brave. For a moment fear clawed at her, terrified she had said too much. But then Michael smiled, slow and radiant, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "She'd like that," he said softly. "She's been asking about you. She heard about the pretty lady who helped Marcus clean up his juice at the center. Isabella doesn't forget kindness." Victoria laughed through her tears, astonished and overwhelmed. "She knows about that. Isabella knows everything that matters to me," Michael replied. His hand closed gently over hers, grounding her. "And something tells me, you're going to matter a lot." For the first time in years, Victoria didn't feel like she was acting, or performing, or protecting herself. For the first time she felt seen, truly seen. And as they stood together on that moonlit terrace, she realized that what had begun as an act of desperation, a business arrangement meant to save face, was slowly becoming the moment that might just save her heart. As the car carried them away from the Thornfield estate, the glitter of chandeliers fading into the night, Victoria rested her head lightly against Michael's shoulder. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of appearances pressing down on her. She didn't feel like the woman constantly fighting to prove her worth. Instead, she felt something far more rare. Peace. What had begun as a desperate arrangement, a calculated plan to show strength at her ex's wedding, had transformed into something she hadn't dared to imagine. She had hired Michael to stand beside her for one night, but he had given her something far greater. He had reminded her of her own strength, and in doing so he had quietly, irrevocably, saved her heart. Months later, the echoes of that evening still shaped her life. Victoria no longer walked into the community center as the untouchable executive, with sharp heels and sharper words. She came instead as a volunteer, sitting cross-legged on the floor with children gathered around, reading them stories of courage, hope, and second chances. And always at her side was Isabella, bright-eyed, curious, and endlessly talkative, already chattering about which book they should share next. Michael was there too, no longer the stranger in a tuxedo, but the steady presence who had rebuilt her understanding of love. He spent his weekends teaching single mothers the skills to repair leaky faucets and creaky doors, his tool belt replaced by laughter, patience in the belief that empowerment mattered more than appearances. The wedding invitation that had once felt like a symbol of betrayal and humiliation now lay tucked inside a memory box, not as a wound but as a marker of transformation. It no longer represented what she had lost, but what she had, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't begin with perfect timing or flawless plans, but with broken pieces finding their way back together in unexpected ways. Because healing rarely comes by avoiding the places that hurt us. It comes when we dare to return to them, with someone who sees us differently. Someone who helps us remember that scars don't make us weaker. They make us human. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person isn't perfection, but the courage to open our hearts again. To let love find us right where we are. Flawed, fragile,